You're listening to the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast, the show with a light-hearted look at the eventing world, all of the big event previews, reviews, and special guests, and of course, backed up with all of the key Echo Ratings stats. Welcome to the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast. Welcome to the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast, and it is a Horse Heroes episode for you listeners. And this is a show that when we asked you guys which horse you would like to talk about next, this horse's name came up certainly on a number of occasions. It is going to be an absolute joy to look back over his career because it has been a remarkable one. Catherine Austen is with me. Catherine, he is a horse that you know very well.
Well, I'm really excited to be part of this because I was friends with the person that owned him and the person that rode him. And so I felt that I saw quite a lot of this horse's career quite up close and personal. And he was exceptionally cool and exciting. And I'm delighted we're doing this.
Yeah, he is an absolute fan favourite. And we are listeners. Let's be honest, you're going to know who we're talking about because you're going to have seen the episode title and the graphic. And it's going to have a lovely picture of the very gorgeous Lenamore, who was the Burghley winner in 2010. He went to 2 Olympic Games. He went to a World Equestrian Games in Aachen in 2006 as well. He has so many top 10s at 5-star level. He was an absolute legend. And we have got both his owner and, well, she rode him at the start of his career. We're going to talk about that. Lexi Jackson, I'll say hello to you first. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, pleasure. It's lovely to be here.
And also joining us, the lady who piloted him to that Burghley victory and to 2 Olympic Games, and including a team bronze in London, might I add, Caroline Powell.
Hi, how are you getting on?
Look, guys, he is one of the most loved horses on the circuit. He's grey, which always goes down a treat with everybody. He's diminutive. I think he stands sub 16 hands. He's only 15.3 or something. He's had such a long career at top level, and we're going to talk about some of those results. But Lexi, can we go back to where it all started? Because you owned him alongside your mother. You started his career, but I believe he was actually bred by Ted Walsh in Ireland. So Ruby Walsh, the jockey's father.
He was, that's right. And then I think originally when he was first born, he was so tiny. And as you quite rightly say, he only ever got to 15.3 at a stretch. I think when he was born, it was such a worry that when he was sitting there in the field as a tiny little soul that he was going to be mistaken for a lamb. So they had to look after him. Anyway, so you're right. Ted Walsh bred him, and then he was bought by a lady who lived in the south of England somewhere that actually my mother taught before she moved to the south of England. She lived in Scotland, not far from us, and Mum taught the lady. And I think Ed, as you all know, was quite a character and was probably a bit much for the girl. And so lots of trials and errors trying to tame him a little bit weren't working. So that's really how we came across him, because I think she was at her wit's end, and Mummy, loving a challenge, said, I'll pay for him to come to Scotland. And so that was it. He arrived on a Eric Gilly lorry, I think it was, and came off the lorry, and we both, we'd never seen him before, we both took one look and started laughing and giggling because he was so tiny. And this was the story we gave my father was, this is an investment. We're going to turn him around and sell him for some money, and that was our excuse for having him. Anyway, so we giggled at each other and put him in the stable and sort of just ignored it with the whole situation for a little while. Then we sort of basically took it, we sort of rather acted as though he hadn't been broken and sort of took him right back to the beginning, popped him on the lunge, and that was all going quite well. Couldn't quite understand what the big drama was. Anyway, over the sort of following weeks and months, you started to see the character that was there. But I think Caroline would agree, for all his naughtiness, it was never malicious. It was just a bit of a sort of, life was just a bit of a laugh for him. So anyway, took him back to square one and carried on like that. And that really was most of that first year. I think he came to us in about February, March time. I do remember the first time I ever jumped him, it was out of the school and in the field, and I popped him over a cross pole or something, and he, on landing, dinked his shoulder, as he sometimes can, and literally before I knew it, I was on the ground next door to him. And sort of he made his mark quite early, shall we say. No. So then the sort of challenge was like, well, fine, if you're going to be like that, we'll try and get through this. And anyway, then Mum actually took him to his first few events. I think she took him around some pre-novices that they were in those days in Scotland. And then I took over probably towards the end of that year. And we went from there, really.
So how old was he when he came to you?
He was 4.
He was 4. Okay.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit more about his character, Caroline, because you said then he might have dropped his shoulder on you a couple of times.
Yeah, no, we've had some quite interesting sort of situations down in the school. We always used to do sort of Tuesday morning jumping with Les Smith, and I remember one day we put up a line of fences going the wrong way down the school, and we ended up not in the school anymore. He jumped, and we could never jump him at home very much. So when you went to a competition, you were on his sort of raw talent and manoeuvring him. And this day we ended up at the school, up the track, and sort of quite a long way away from where we should have been. So he always had a charisma about him. And whether you actually agreed with his charisma or not was a different thing.
And Lexi, in those sort of early starting to compete him, when did you realise that this was a properly talented horse?
I suppose, to be honest, Caroline, until you've had a really talented horse like that, I guess you don't really know, and you sort of don't know where the limit is. It was certainly, I'd ridden some lovely horses until that point, but I certainly, I hadn't had loads and loads of horses by any means. So, it was, you just didn't really know. And I suppose the sort of ridiculous thing to say, until he'd gone round his first badminton with Caroline, really, you just don't know until they do. I mean, sure, Caroline would know if she'd got on him at that time, but I didn't. I certainly didn't have that experience.
I don't think until actually they're finished. And like I don't know about you, but I really miss him. Like now, and at the time I was like, oh God, we've got to go, jumping, we've got to go hacking and things. And so it was always a bit of a mission because he was quite naughty, wasn't he? And it wasn't until he wasn't there that I was like, oh God, he really was so special. So I don't think I appreciated. He was a wonderful, lovely horse to work with, but I don't think I really, really, really appreciated him until after a couple of years after he was retired, and I was like, God, where is he? God, I really wish I was riding him now. and that's not nothing to do with him. It's just everything's so busy that you don't actually appreciate horses sometimes until they're really appreciate them until they're sort of retired and not there, and then suddenly you're like, wow, he really was amazing.
Yeah, that's interesting. And was he always
going to be angry
a pleasure to ride cross country?
When he was good, he was amazing, and when he was bad, he was very, very naughty. We just looking at his record here, we went through bits where he was brilliant, and we did hit a very naughty bit. Lex, I don't know if you remember Burnham Market at the corner coming out the trees at Sunken Hollow. But oh God, I mean, he was just beside himself.
He just went past it about 3 times, didn't he?
Yeah,
more than 3 times.
I'm not jumping that. And then Blair, before he won Burghley, remember we took him up to do the dressage, and he excelled himself on losing the class.
Absolutely horrendous. But that became a bit of a part of the sort of the build-up, didn't it? We'd taken to Blair to go through the flicking motions of doing an awful dressage test. I mean, it was almost as though if he'd done a good one, you'd had to have a bad dress rehearsal. Going back to
he practically halved it. So that test that you're talking about, he went up to Blair in 2010, a few weeks before Burghley. He scored a 66.6 in old money. He then went to Burghley and won on a 38.7. I mean, that's like 28 points difference. That's a whole dressage in itself.
He needed to go to Blair to just blow himself out. He was just beside himself, and the whole week he was nightmare. So by the time he got to Burghley, he was over the whole thing. He was just there because we worked him quite hard up at Blair, and by the time he went back on the lorry to go to Burghley, he was like, "Oh God, really?"
back again. Can we go back to, obviously, Lexi, you took him all the way up to 3-star level as it was, then 4-star level as it is now. How did the decision come about? Because you had a good deal of success with him. You were top 15 at Bramham. How did the conversation come about for him to then go to Caroline to be campaigned rather than continuing to compete him yourself?
Sure. Just going back one further step, for anybody that does, have ask yourself, do they have the talent? One thing he did always have right from the beginning, and even in my inexperience at the time, you were so aware that he was so sure of himself jumping. He absolutely knew where his forefeet were, and that was very obvious right from the beginning. If you were completely wrong at something, he would just get his legs out of the way every time.
But do you not think that's the reason why he stayed sound for so long? Because he was so sure of himself. He knew exactly where he was.
Sure,
he stayed within his box, and he was amazing.
He knew exactly where his feet were planting and taking off from, and right from the beginning. So that was very obvious. Now, did I know that he was going to go and have the career that he did? Of course I didn't. That would, Anyway, so sorry, moving on. So yes, you're right. I had lots of fun on him, and he was an amazing jumping horse. He was very frustrating in the dressage because, he was never the most beautiful mover, but he absolutely could do it. He could do all the movements very easily. So, one would always be a little sort of lagging behind on the dressage, and then, quite merrily jump a double clear. And gosh, it was nice to have a good show jumping horse. I'd come off a particularly bad show jumping horse, and so I used to absolutely dread it. And then the younger stablemate would come out, being Ed, and he would jump a super clear. So that was a real privilege to be on something that you knew that could do that. And then you're right, I had lovely times at Bramham, and I did the under 25s there a few times, and had a nice time at Lenamore. And then actually I did take him to Burghley, which I think I was completely sort of awestruck by the whole experience. And I remember coming into the main arena, which was early on in the course, and I saw myself on the big screen. I was like, oh, crikey. And I think, it was all too much for me in the experience that I was at that stage. And so we didn't have a very successful Burghley at all. But I sort of was living at home with mum and dad at the time. And, I was probably 24, 25. And you sort of then get to that stage in your life where you have to ask yourself, are you going to try and make a career out of eventing, or are you going to, is that what you want to do, or do you want to, go and get a job and that kind of life? So I didn't want to make a big career, or I didn't probably think I was good enough to make a career out of eventing. Plus it meant living at home for the foreseeable, which was lovely, but, there becomes a time. Especially when you're tucked away in deepest dark of Scotland. So that was the point when I sort of decided actually enough was enough. And I remember going for a ride with mum and sort of psyching myself up to tell her this. But I'd sussed it all out in my head, and that what I wanted to do with him, and I wanted to ask Caroline to ride him, and I thought that they would be perfect together. So that I can very clearly remember the ride, and my mother burst into floods of tears, and it really didn't go down very well at all. But anyway, she got her head around it, and we asked Caroline. I think we asked you it was Belton, I think, and I remember being really nervous.
You used to go to when I was working at Starts, and you came for a lesson one day, and you said that to me, and I was like, you said that, if I'm not going to ride, then I'd like you to ride him, and I was like, yeah, because that gets talked about quite a lot when you're sort of young and I'm going to buy you, or I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. and I never ever thought that it would come true, or even be on the horizon. So when when it actually did happen and Ed turned up in the yard, I was a wee bit sort of struck by the whole thing. It was amazing.
I should also think that you probably thought, my goodness, what have I taken on? Because of course you I'm sure, and lots of other people could see that he was very talented with me riding him, but probably, he absolutely, had not been given the opportunity at that stage to have shown his full colours, which he later did with Caroline. So I'm sure there was
no, but not
what you'd taken
horses,
on.
They don't just sort of become stars, and it's the making of them. What you guys have done. I mean, I was lucky. I just reaped the benefits of everything, which what you guys did was more amazing than anything, because you took naughty Ed and made him into a superstar, and then I was lucky enough to just take him on further.
Caroline, what was he like in the early days? How did you form a partnership with him?
He was so naughty. I was lucky because Janie loved doing all the sitting work, because he used to do Burghley and then he'd go home to Janie's. And I think, Lex, you were down in London at that time, so I think a lot of that fell on. And Janie loved doing the walking and the trotting and
yeah, she's a major part of the whole puzzle. She really did. She played a major role.
Yeah, no, she did the most amazing job. And he used to turn up in, I think, January and February, and he was so fit and well that we actually needed just to give him a couple of days off just to sort of cool him down. But when he came back, he knew he was there to work, and he was great. But Janie used to ride him and lead something else, whereas we used to ride something else and lead him, because he just used to jog the whole time. So the good old days when the roads and tracks were there, you used to go out for your 2-hour hacks and on the roads, and 2 hours bouncing around was just I think I did it once.
Oh, it was awful, wasn't it?
Horrible.
I used to get to the end of the steeplechase and obviously wind them down and have a walk, and then I would see how long I could walk for, because I knew once I started trotting again, that was it. There was no chance of having a walk after that. So I would push out that whatever minute it might be, or 2, 3, 4 minutes, as long as I possibly could.
I know. But even out hacking, you're riding something else, and here's Ed, and he's cantering along beside you on the spot, and he's trotting, he's jogging, and you're like, God, it's no wonder he was so fit. But that was just him, and that was him being part of his box, and him being in his part of his whole thing. He knew exactly how much he could do, and he knew how fit he needed to be by the end of it to do. He knew the time of year. You could basically, put him out, and he would go and get himself fit, and he was amazing.
And Caroline, you took him at the end of that first season. You took him to Blair when was second at Blair on him, and then the following spring in 2005, you took him to Badminton, and that was the big deal, wasn't it? Is this what we now call a 5-star horse or not?
Yeah, God, I mean, you're talking quite a few years ago. So, in those days, you just went out and did it, didn't you? You didn't think about it very much. You just went out and popped around Badminton and popped around Burghley, and now there's a wee more thought going into it. But he just loved the crowd, and he loved showing off. And I remember the start blocks. I mean, he was like a coiled spring. In the first couple of jumps, we were sort of hit and miss and a bit scary. And then he settled down into the most lovely rhythm. And he just popped away quite happily. So, by the time he got a few Badmintons and Burghleys into it, it was, it wasn't a nerve-wracking thing. It was actually quite a joy. I remember when he won Burghley, the boys at the stable manager's office, they said he came off the lorry and he was just going to win. You could tell he was going to win. And you know what? You nearly could. He just had that feeling about him. He was amazing.
I was just going to move on to talking about teams, because he represented New Zealand with great success, several times. And his first championship was Aachen World Equestrian Games in 2006.
I think we'd rather forget that one.
Yeah. But he was a creature of habit. So, and I don't know if you can see his full record, but he used to go, was it Lincoln, Dalton, Badminton?
Yeah. Occasionally a Western Part chucked in there.
Yeah, there was. And then Gatcombe, and then Burghley.
So he at Belton in the dressage, wasn't he?
Oh, he was a nightmare at Belton. But that was part of getting ready for Badminton, and he knew that. And, he got into this routine and he knew exactly where he was and exactly what he had to do. And you went to some competitions and, it was just a nightmare. And you went to some and he absolutely adored it. He loved badminton and Burghley, but you took him outside his comfort zone, and which, the Arkans and the Hong Kongs and things. And it was something just a little bit different for him. And he didn't struggle with them, but it was just a different feeling for him. And he did like to know where he was, and he knew exactly what he could do.
So he went from Aachen. He was inside the top 30 at Aachen. Did he go on then to? He was runner-up at Gatcombe. Then the following year went to badminton in the spring, finished fourth. I mean, the number of top fives he collected at 5-star, obviously topped off by that win at Burghley in 2010, which we'll talk about in a second.
Do top 10 and there's more.
Yeah, but honestly, the number that he had was remarkable. And the reason I'm going to kind of compare a top five is because actually, in the sort of the 2000 to the 2012 period, to get 5 top fives at 5-star level was quite rare. We've seen a few horses do it since, the likes of Libya Sadiq Sam, Ballamore Class, horses like that. But actually, he was one of the first to achieve those sort of top class, top level results and go close every time. I mean, the amounts of badmintons and Burghleys he came so close at was just remarkable. And the one thing that sticks for me is he was so unbelievably sound. So 10 years was the span of his first top level. So when we say top level, 4-star or 5-star as they are now, as we'll refer to them, but 10 years from his first to his last. So 2002 to 2012. And we haven't got any other horse on the Echo Ratings database that has repeated that.
No. But wasn't it amazing? I mean, he did not miss a beat the whole way through. Like he, even Mike Shepherd was our team vet at the time, and he was just like, I've never seen a horse like this. But that is all a part of Ed staying within his box, and he just knew exactly where all his legs were, and he just knew he was the most unbelievable little horse.
Yeah, and actually, if you think about it, in that time, I mean, he went, there was I can't forget which year it was, but there was an incredibly dry badminton, wasn't there? And it was
2007. Was it 2007?
Absolute concrete. And actually, he definitely, Caroline, I think he preferred running on top of the ground, didn't he, to like a super wet. But then, if it was really wet, he still just dug out of it, didn't he?
I know, Lex, but he just loved jumping, so it didn't really matter, did it?
He definitely had a preferred. He had a preferred, he would prefer it on the firm side to the non-firm side. Yeah. But having said that, as Caroline says, he'd just jump out of anything. I think the firm side helped the speed, helped make the time, shall we say. If he was running on top of the ground a bit easier, being that tiny, and he had a gear, didn't he, Caroline? Once you were up at top gear, that was the gear. You weren't going to suddenly see him sort of go up another gear, sort of, a third of the way to the finish. So
He didn't necessarily make up. He just sort of kept on going, didn't he? But you certainly didn't have that next level of speed that a lot of the thoroughbreds do. But one thing he did do is he just kept on going, and he kept jumping. I don't remember. I've got a picture of him here jumping the Cottesmore Leap, and it must have been one of the first. It must have been 2005 because it's the old colours and Lexi saddle and things. And you remember he took a stride out in front of it, and my face is just like, oh my God. And he was just like, it's all right, I've got it. It's just like, you're mad. So, he used to take you on the most amazing trips around the park.
Let's talk about 2010, because that was a year that you decided that he wouldn't go to a championship, which that year was in the World Championships in Kentucky, which was considered, it was another flight, wasn't it, that you didn't particularly want to put him through. And so you went to Burghley.
Yeah, but that was that was everybody's choice in a way, because he didn't really behave that well when he went away from the places that he knew, and we'd sort of twigged this. If you look at his record, you can sort of see that. And luckily I had another horse that went. So, we sort of made that decision, and we all sort of sat down and he was like, what do you want to do? Because at the end of the day, he was Jamie and Lexi's horse, and they quite rightly said, he's not the best when he does go away from what he knows, and he is absolutely brilliant where he knows. So we decided, and I think that was everybody's choice, wasn't it, Lex? That
I think
Burghley
very much
was
so.
Yeah. Go. Yeah. We were quite lucky, all of us, because we were able to sit down and sort of say what we wanted, and with him in mind as well. And I don't think we've made too many bad decisions for him. Yeah. No.
Talk about 2010 Burghley and how he went and how it felt.
Well, I mean, it's that thing, isn't it? He came off the lorry, and the lead up when he went to Blair, he was quite naughty. So by the time he got to Burghley, he was probably a little bit flatter than what he had been the years before, just because he'd had so much work, and obviously Blair, you've got the big hills to tire them out on. But the moment he came down the ramp, he just had that feeling that he had been there before, and he sort of looked at people as though they were looking back at him in awe. The dressage was magical, wasn't it, Lex? Because I remember looking at you. I came around the top corner at Steve, looked at you, caught your eye, and I was just like, what is he doing? Because he was just doing the most foot perfect test.
We've got this.
Yeah, we've got this under control. So that could have been anybody sitting on there. And he never put a foot wrong the whole week. He was just absolutely angelic, which I can't say too many times. You can say that. He was throwing something up at us, but he was just a superstar that whole week, and I don't think there was one blade of grass he put wrong the whole time. It was lovely.
And then, Lexi, what happened the following weekend to make it even more of a special time?
Hang on. So I said to Lexi, so Lex, I haven't got your wedding present. What do you want? What would you like for your wedding? She went, just one Burghley.
I did. I can remember.
There you go.
Mum and I we tried lots of ways of, staying in a B&B somewhere, staying in, I don't know, a hotel down the road. And then we eventually realised, the first badminton I slept in the back of Caroline's horse sports, which, no rider wants anyone that, especially not the owner in the back of the horse box. Anyway, so we tried lots of different things, and we realised the best way to do this was to hire a caravan. So we used to do that, and we had a caravan in the horse box park at Burghley, and Caroline and I were just nattering in the caravan. I think not even talking about horses or anything. I'm sort of, talking about life in general. I think we were having a rather deep, meaningful conversation. Anyway, it got to the end of it, and putting the world to right. And she said, "Oh goodness, I haven't done anything about your wedding present." And I do. I remember saying so flippantly, "Oh, don't worry about that. Just win this. That'll do."
You're
anyway,
so funny.
I know. Can you imagine? Anyway, I mean, it really was a fairy tale. The whole, it was amazing. And then to sort of have it sort of all done and in the bag, and then sort of, I think I went back to work for a couple of days, and then back up to Scotland before the wedding, and then the wedding, and Ed made an appearance at the end. There was a big dilemma because, I didn't want it to be some sort of naff, here's the superstar horse sort of parading around, because of course lots of our friends at the wedding aren't remotely horsey at all, so they sort of, lots of people obviously got it, but lots of people wouldn't have, so I didn't want it to be a big focal point. But he made a sort of brief appearance at the end, didn't he, Caroline? And it was lovely. Henry and I walked away with him, and that I sort of did contemplate getting on him on my wedding dress, and I thought that could just end the whole.
Drop the shoulder, Lexi.
in a complete disaster. So we didn't. We walked away, and I think he trampled all over the back of the dress. But anyway, it didn't matter by that
I was going to say, was he in best behaviour?
No,
did he
wild?
Oh, okay.
He was quite wild, wasn't he?
Yeah, but
it was dark, and there was flashing lights everywhere. But anyway, that was normal. We expected that. So no, it was very magical.
You couldn't really ask for a better fairy tale of that sort of. It was everything, and he kind of he'd had so many top consistent results that he deserved to win one of the big ones. And actually, the latter couple of years of his career was some of his best. I mean, he won Burghley in 2010. He was 6th at Badminton the following spring. He had a top 10 at Arc, and then he was 4th at Burghley again. And then was his sort of final swan song. Talk to us about London, because that was his last international competition. It was obviously an Olympics, but on home turf, so to speak, out of his comfort zone, which you've already spoken about. How did that play out? Because he was actually 19 when he went to London, which I had to double check my maths, because you don't often see a horse going to an Olympics at the age of 19, but he was still there, and he was still a stalwart of the New Zealand team, came home with a team bronze. Talk to us about the London experience.
But that was another quite sort of in-depth conversation we had, because, we'd opted out of flying into Kentucky, and then suddenly we were like, what about London? And, that it was a wee bit sort of, quite a tricky sort of situation.
Yeah, we had to backtrack a bit, didn't we?
Just a wee bit, but I'm so pleased we did, because he absolutely loved it. Going around the cross country, and the crowd, God, they were just clapping and cheering the whole way. And it was up the hills, and we used to train on the hills, so that wasn't too much of a big deal. But they did tire, because it was quite hot as well. And he just pulled everything out of the bag. He was absolutely brilliant. The dressage was a wee bit wild, but that was Ed. But cross country, it is one of those things. And I don't know about you, Lex, but I'm so pleased that we were actually able to be part of the team and do what we did and be part of the whole thing, because it really was magical.
Yeah, no, it was very, very special.
Tell us about the decision to retire him, because obviously he goes to London, does his second Olympics. He's fit, he's well, he's 19. He then turns 20. How did that decision come about, in order to kind of go, do you know what, he loves his work, but it's time to step back a bit?
Well, we always said that, he would tell us when he had enough. And he came, he went back up to Janie after London, and he had a few, not niggles, because he really didn't even see a vet his whole career. I think he was probably the cheapest horse that.
It's like the dream.
Yeah, I know. He was unbelievable. It was like, the vet still vaccinations, and literally the vets used to see the vaccinations only. And then he sort of started getting a little bit, not niggly, but just a bit sort of, a bit stiffer. And we always said that he would tell us when he'd had enough. And I remember we were down in Marlborough, and it was cold, and he just felt gurney, and he just sort of didn't quite feel just his normal self. And I don't know, did we retire him a wee bit too early? I don't know, but it felt right at the time. And we always said that if he wasn't feeling the love for it, then we wouldn't be doing it, and we would have that very hard discussion. And I think we all sort of sat down and had probably a big cry and a big big gin and a big celebration of everything, and decided to call it on him, which I think it was the right thing. Next, we were lucky enough. We did it was Derby, not Hexie Derby, the Hexie Jumpers Event Challenge a few times, and he loved it. But he never felt just the Ed that he was, the following years. And I had no regrets apart from, in hindsight, a couple of years later, you're like, God, where is he? He would love this. But I felt it was right for him, and I hope you guys did too.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a difficult decision, wasn't it? Because as Caroline says, there wasn't anything sort of, you couldn't pinpoint anything that was wrong. He did before every season, he used to go for what we call a sort of MOT, just to check everything's, as it should be and all the rest of it. And as there was never anything to report back, it was just part of his routine. And he had his usual MOT, and sort of whenever he went back to Caroline, which must have been about sort of January, February time. And, there was certainly a bit of wear and tear, but no more, in fact, far less than you'd expect of a horse that had done what he's done and the miles on the clock. But, it was that awful sort of decision, in that, of course, I think Caroline would agree that we would all have dearly loved one more badminton, which would have been it was so spoiling anyway, the whole thing. And you sort of have to say, no, you'd never forgive yourself, would you, if he'd gone one last badminton.
He was 19 going on 20, and there weren't too many horses sort of going at that time. And, you know, yes, you could, but when you have to start working on getting the horse mentally sort of prepared, then, you know, that's kind of the wrong time. And that's when it does go wrong.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
you know, he was starting to think a little bit backwards, and it was just, it was an easy decision, but it was a heartbreaking decision.
The right
because,
one.
You know, he'd been so amazing right the way through. But, you know, and I remember the one day, and we took him up the gallops, and I actually had to kick him, and I was like, yeah, okay, this isn't him. And yeah, maybe it was the weather, maybe it was something else, but you know, that wasn't him.
It was interesting, Lexi, because we had talked, you know, many years earlier about what Ed might do in his retirement. And I remember you saying, well, it won't be hunting. I mean, he's never going to go hunting. He just won't settle to it. And what did he do in his retirement with you?
Well, he came to live down with me in Oxfordshire, and more is just because it was nice having him around, to be honest. And you know, I rode him out a bit and all the rest of it. As you say, Catherine, no intention of taking him hunting, because I thought that would just be a sort of suicidal trip, to be honest. And then bizarrely, we were autumn hunting at the time, and I don't know. I just woke up one morning. Must have been the morning before, because I can't believe I sort of literally woke up that morning and said we're off. But I said, right, we're gonna do it tomorrow. And you know what? If it all goes wrong, we were close to home, so that helps. I thought if necessary, I could just come home with my tail between my legs. And I thought, stuff it. Let's just go and see what happens. And it was before children, so you know there was nothing stopping us getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and going. And we went, and you know what? He behaved immaculately, and his usual joggy self, but nothing. I've been on worse out hunting. And then I got lots of people saying to me, oh, but, you know, it's not the first time. They all behave the first time. And, you know, you need to take them 4 or 5 times, and then he'll be a pain in the arse. And he didn't. He absolutely loved it. And it was a real joy to go on him, to have no dressage to worry about, literally just sort of jumping this, that, and everything. And he absolutely loved it. I think he just loved being as free as a bird and doing the thing that he loved most. And he wasn't a pain at all. And I hunted him, I can't remember whether it was 2, if not 3 seasons. And then the sort of children came along, and it, you know, getting anybody that knows me, I hate to do anything by halves, and I get that from my mother. You know, I'm a great believer that you get them totally fit to do whatever they're doing, and I can't sort of cut the corners. So, as Caroline said, you know, at the end of his eventing career, you know, getting him that fit again, he did slightly sort of give you the look and say, really, not again. And that sort of became quite apparent in his hunting fitness too. And you were sort of like, okay, I think enough's enough. We've had 2, if not 3, amazing hunting seasons on him, which he's loved. And he is so happy now in retirement. He's gone back up to Yorkshire. He's with Mum and Dad now, and he just loves it. And you know, he's happy. And Mum said, did I want him down for another season? And I thought at that point, and that sort of second career of his was, you know, I think he'd done his bit, and enough was enough. And I certainly didn't want to take him out feeling he was sort of half fit for the job, rather than.
Isn't it funny how he gave you that look, didn't he? He certainly gave you that feel. He was just like, no. And you're like, oh, all right then. Okay. You know, he really, his body language was just amazing, wasn't it? And I remember the day that I had to phone and sort of say, you know, he's just not feeling this. And he was just like, no, I'm not doing this anymore, which is probably exactly the same feeling that you got, Lex, when you know, the hunting then. No.
What a joy he was to both of you, you know, in completely different ways, and what incredible places and pleasure he gave you both.
You know, Lex, do you remember, you know, the Burghleys, how many Burghleys we do, so many, and you guys had your caravan, and every Saturday or Sunday morning, and I was always a bad sleeper on Saturday night, and I'd be up, you know, probably up all night, sort of reliving everything through my mind, and I was always at the stables first thing in the morning, sort of 4:30, 5 o'clock when they opened, and every time Sunday morning, knock, knock, knock at your guys' caravan, and would sit in bed and natter away for a few hours because there was never anything to do with him. You would trot him up. Yeah, no, he's fine. Oh God, what am I going to do to the trot up? So, we'd sit and have cups of tea after cups of tea, didn't we? It was hilarious.
We did. It was a very, very special relationship between, horse, rider and owners. We were all great friends anyway. And, we obviously had complete trust in Caroline to do the right thing. And she and Ed just, it was magic, wasn't it, to watch? And one thing that, I'm so grateful for is that I was very sort of privileged and lucky to be able to own and follow and watch and be so involved because Caroline, allowed us to be so involved for so many years. And, I was at an age where, I wasn't, a 15, 16-year-old girl. I was, 25 onwards for however many years it went on for. I was totally at an age where I could appreciate and enjoy and love every moment. I mean, we traveled all over the world with him. It was also an incredibly special time for my mother and I, because as mother and daughter, we did it all together. And the timing was just so, you look back now, and for me, the timing was amazing because, I was working, of course, we all know how expensive to run an event horse is. I was able to do that without really any other responsibilities at that time. The idea of, trying to run an event horse now with a young family would just be bonkers. I could never justify it. Whereas then, I could justify it, but I was also incredibly lucky in that, he was successful and therefore he helped out a huge amount in the cost of running him. He sort of probably, I've never totted it up or whatever, but, ultimately he probably ran himself, as, which is unheard of in an event horse. So, yeah, I am incredibly, or we, all of us, are so privileged that, we had that time together at that time. The timing could really not have been better.
No. Don't you wish we could go back and do it again?
Oh goodness, I still I get a sort of funny feeling sort of on the build up to badminton time, thinking, gosh, how much one would love to rewind the clock and do it all over again.
And he gave you a 5-star win, Caroline, which is a wonderful thing, and there are very few people in this world who have won a 5-star.
No, it's amazing, in even the pictures around the house and stuff, and you still, I walk past them sometimes and I sort of stop and look, and it was, the whole thing was magical. And, I think, oh God, how many years did I ride him? I think it was 8. Yes, there were the ups and downs, and you had your times where you thought, God almighty, and you had your times you were like, on top of the world. But he just kept giving, and I think the most amazing thing about Janie, Lexi, myself, and Ed was, Ed was honest with us. We were honest with, I was honest with Ed and Janie, and McKinnon's were very honest with Ed and myself. And I think the whole thing actually worked really, really well. And, if there's one thing you take away from it is, just, gosh, we're so lucky. It was just an amazing time. I want to do it again.
I know. Do you know what? Listening to this, I want to go back and watch Lenamore videos. I want to just relive it all because we knew it was going to be a special story. But I think sometimes there's just an extra little sort of sprinkling of something special. And he obviously had it. You guys all had it in your relationship in sort of making his career as well. It was a real team effort. It has been a real pleasure to hear more about it. So thank you both for coming on and telling us the Lenamore story.
You're welcome. It's nice to relive it actually, and sort of and you forget looking up his results. He was absolutely amazing. He was a horse of a lifetime, really, wasn't he, Lex?
The most remarkable character, the most remarkable sound, little tough warrior. And thank you, as I say, for coming on and sharing the story. It's been an absolute pleasure. Catherine, thank you as well. I know this was a show, we've spoken about Lenamore on the podcast before actually, and I know this was a show that we were both pretty keen to do.
Yeah, I'm delighted we've done it, and listening to it is quite emotional really, so it's good times.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's lovely to go back and remember these real horse heroes. If you've got any suggestions for the next horse to feature, then get in touch with us at Eventing Podcast. We would love to hear from you. But for now, that is all we've got time for. A huge thank you to Lexi, Caroline and Catherine. And we'll be back very soon with another episode of the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast. This podcast is available for free on iTunes, Spotify, Podcast Addict, or wherever you usually listen to your podcasts. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. Find us at eventingpodcast.com or search Eventing Podcast on social media.